exchanging of load and or discharge ports, repatriation of crew members, and most importantly, charterers and traders' demands and requirements for delivering of cargoes without introduction of bills of lading or switching the bills of lading in exchange of letters of indemnities, which in most cases may prejudice the ship owner's P&I insurance, and we don't like that. We have not seen excessive number of corona-related cruise sicknesses on board either, except some cruise ships. But even if the number of incidents were not overwhelmingly excessive, the handling of the claims were extremely problematic. Once the crew recovered, he could not stay in the hospital. Hotels did not accept them. There were no flights so that we could repatriate them. And yeah, we had miserable days in handling the claims. On the other hand, shrinking world trade volume have certainly affected the freight market directly, because 90% of the world trade is being carried by seaway, which in turn affected the insurance markets. Less number of ships, together with reduced values, means less premium income. This has been aggravated by accumulation of laid-up vessels, which means a further reduction in premium income. Reduced premium volume means further pressure on loss ratios, and considering the possible P&I losses to be particularly encountered by the cruise industry, will not help the marine insurance market to improve its position. I am personally expecting some major claims in the cruise industry, as several cruise ships had to be quarantined for days with thousands of passengers on board. Trips had to be canceled. Passengers got sick while they were on board the ships, etc. No sound claim has been heard yet, or I didn't hear anything yet in the market. But I hear preparations are being done by some major law firms in USA. If it materializes, the effect on P&I market may be serious. On top of this, the poor investment market, reduced investment incomes of the P&I clubs, which was the major source of income of P&I clubs, second the premium income. And as a result, their loss ratios will become worse than anticipated. And this will unfortunately have an adverse effect on next year's renewal in February 2021. In other words, we should expect an upward trend in hull and machinery and P&I premiums in the continuing year. On the other hand, again for similar reasons, the new building contracts have diminished considerably. Yeah, actually, new building contracts were in a downfall over the last 3 years since 2018. In January-May period of 2018, the compensated gross ton ordered, the shipbuilding contracts were about 15 million compensated gross ton. That's reduced in the same period 2019 to 12 million and reduced same period in 2020 to 5 million compensated gross ton. So the difference between last year and this year is more than 50%. This is in short how Corona affected the insurance market. Of course, I'm going in summaries. Because if we go into the details, it takes hours and hours. You also touched upon the clauses. Now, we have not seen too many major changes in insurance clauses, but there are two main ones which have started to be used widespread, particularly in marine liability sectors like ports and terminals and ship repairers liabilities, etc. These are LM 5391 and LM 5395, I think. Let me make sure. Yes, 5395. Now, both of them are corona exclusion clauses. However, 5391 is a little bit strange. It has an ambiguous wording. Now, the insurance policy, the institute time clause, it says, let's say, this clause starts saying the insurance policy does not cover any way, does not cover any claim in any way caused by or resulting from, and that continues. Now, institute time clauses specifically starts as this insurance covers loss, damage, cost, or expense caused by. There is no resulting from in institute time clauses. There is no mention to it because the words caused by traditionally is considered to trigger the ordinary proximate cause rule. Now, we have lawyers in the panel, which may criticize me, or if they have anything to add, they can add to it. But if you include caused by or resulting from together, then you are opening a new discussion on the proximate cause principle. You are opening a new door to generate two concurrent risks. I'm touching upon this because you asked the question, Sinem, you said the clauses. This is very crucial. You are opening a new door to generate two concurrent risks. The exclusion will apply even if the immediate cause of the loss caused by is a risk insured, but somehow the less immediate but nevertheless concurrent cause is the risk excluded. We may probably see some other clauses, etc., but particularly the lawyers, brokers, and the insured should examine the wording very well. We don't have that in 5395. 5395 does not include caused by either. It says this clause shall be paramount. The insurance excludes coverage for any loss, damage, liability, cost, or expense directly arising from. At least this says arising from. It doesn't say or caused by. This is a small reference to the two clauses which has recently been introduced to the market as Corona or COVID-19 exclusion clauses, which I think everybody should pay attention to it. We're not seeing the usage or to practice widely in hull and machinery insurances yet. As I said, it's mostly used for the moment by ports and terminals, in ports and terminals and ship repairs liability insurance. Now, coming back to the market again, what's next? Where will we see ourselves in the foreseeable future? I will give you a quick example. The other day, we were having our routine conference call with the London office, and I said that the efficiency of the broking team in London have considerably increased during the remote working days. In the early days of the pandemic, we were all scared that we will not be able to have any renewals. Lloyd's was closed. We will not be able to reach the underwriters. No claim will be paid. How the claims will be handled, etc. So we were having really nightmares. After a couple of weeks, we have seen that the system settled itself automatically and things were progressing faster and more efficiently than before when everybody was in the office. Now you're going to ask me why. Let me explain. In London, brokers come to the office on time in the morning, then they have a meeting, in parentheses, that's the coffee break, which takes around half an hour to 1 hour. Then on certain days of the week, we have brokers meetings, which evaluates the market conditions, who resigned from which company stops underwriting, who is laid off, etc. In other words, it's a market gossip meeting. So it takes you to 10:30 to 11 o'clock. Then the brokers go to Lloyd's for routine placement and come back to lunch. If it's a business lunch, 3 hours. If it's a normal lunch, about 1.5 to 2 hours. Then they go to market again in the afternoon, a tea break, and off you go. If you calculate, maybe they work 3 hours efficiently. Now, after the Corona break, or say that remote working times, tea, lunch, coffee, etc., everything takes about 1 hour at home. The rest, there is no colleague that you can chat. What are you going to talk to your spouse after 2 months? Nothing much to be discussed. You sit on the desk and you seriously work the whole day on the computer. Now, and the efficiency, it's unbelievable. It's at record levels, believe me. I have experienced this. Now, this will, of course, be evaluated by operation officers, etc., and new norms will be laid down in the offices. The new norms will definitely be not the same with the normals, as like colleagues and participants touched upon it. We knew the new normals will be seriously, completely different than the normals that we had and we have been trained over the years. There will be more and more online placements, online claims handling, and I'm afraid face-to-face underwriting and broking will eventually be history. How that's going to work in marine insurance, time will show, but marine insurance will not be the same as it had been over the last 300 years. This is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aret. You have one question now. Can I address to you right now? Perhaps that would be better. Mr. Tabeko is addressing the liner shipping has seen several blank sailing with some ports not serviced or resulted in delays. And he's wondering how has the P&I adapted to accommodate liners from mitigating extensive insurance claims from shippers?
Yeah, can I have that again? Sorry, all of a sudden my screen went. Can you repeat the question?
He's asking, the liner shipping has seen several blank sailing with some ports not serviced or resulted in delays. And he's asking, how has the P&I adapted to accommodate liners from mitigating extensive insurance claims from shippers?
Now, this question does not have a straightforward answer. It depends on what kind of a claim it is. If it is a marine related, if the delay is as a result of a marine peril, then P&I clause will respond to that. But insurance does not cover commercial or delays as a result of commercial reasons. That's a commercial risk. So it depends on the type of the claim that liners are receiving from their clients or from the cargo receivers. As I said, there has to be a maritime peril behind the reason. There has to be, as we were touching about, an approximate cause. I don't know. I'm sorry that I couldn't reply that in more details, but
yeah,
we have no black and white answers to that.
I think that can be the best answer for that.
But we can discuss that
with another webinar, perhaps.
Yeah, or on the private line, he can express his problems, and I can try to give a reply to him.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, Mr. Oknar is addressing how does PNI adapt with remote surveys? How reliable and efficient are those?
It's not only the PNI club's problem, it's the hull and machinery underwriters' problem also. For a period of time, we couldn't send surveyors on board the ships. So the surveys had to be done remotely based on had to be based on documentation only. So far, we have not had any serious problems, or at least we have not had any serious problems in that respect. But overall, around the world, in majority, whether it was efficient or not, it depends on the surveyor used as well. Now, we have had many condition surveys, for example, on the basis of documentation, remotely done. And the underwriters and the PNI clubs were happy from the results that they received. And we had serious collision cases, which again had to be surveyed remotely. But nowadays, certain ports are more relaxed, and surveyors could attend the ships over the last 2 weeks, etc. They can attend the ships, and if anything in the past was done by mistake or inefficiently on the basis of documentation, it's being corrected after the surveyor attended the ship.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's satisfactory or not.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Mr. Aret, again for your presentation so far. Yes, Mr. Oknar is also saying his thankfulness. He said thank you for your answer. Thank you for being with us today.
I'm not going anywhere yet.
Okay,
I'm still with you, so yeah.
In case if you have, dear attendees, if you have any other questions to Mr. Aret, please keep writing. And once we have the breaks, we are going to address him his questions before, yeah, he'll leave. And before I continue asking the other speakers their questions, I want to ask Maria Laura, what is the result of our poll? Do we have any results from our attendees?
Yes, actually, we already have our results. Okay, we have legal field, 50%. Just to add that all the participants have answered the poll. Okay, very important. Insurance, 20%, finance, 5%, chartering, 27%, education, 12%, cruise industry, 2%, ports, 8%, ship operations, 29%, and other, 18%.
Okay, Maria Laura, it sounds like a Eurovision here. With the
good spread.
You did it very well. You could do that.
Except that nobody has 0 points.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you to our attendees for being with us. I think the highest sector you said is the legal field. So, yeah, so the highest percentage. And I want to continue asking questions to Mr. Nikos. Mr. Nikos, since now we're talking about pandemic, during the pandemic-related restriction, how was agency and logistic business affected? Have any technologies been implemented to assist in port operations? And how do you see their future in the maritime industry? Thank you.
Right. Well, in fact, port agency, port operations going mostly with vessel movements and the crew movements, and that has been very severely disrupted. As we speak, there must be at least 500,000 seamen who are stranded in various parts of the world on board vessels or at home, not being able to go to work, or those who are at work have stayed 3-4 months already, more than their time. They're getting mentally affected, getting crazy to go back to their families. And it's not possible because most of the ports of the world, most of the governments, because the ports allow, but the government does not allow the flights or the immigration. So we have, this lockdown has created a serious disruption on the crew movements. I'm starting with the human element because that is the most important. To keep the propeller running, you have crew on board, and this crew, they are signing a contract, and according to the contract terms, within 3 to 6 months on average, they have to go home, and their replacement has to go on board, and that is not happening. Now, as we speak, there are a few locations like the US, Singapore, to some extent, India and Indonesia for only their own crews, Gibraltar, UK, and generally Northern Europe allowing any nationalities, but there is no flights. So even if you take out the Filipino crew, there is no flights to Philippines from Gibraltar, for example, which is feasible to take people out. Or in Greece, it's not allowed to have anybody coming out of the vessel. So that is the most serious disruption. And as we as shipping agents, we have been faced with a situation that we cannot serve our clients. And of course, that translates into significant loss of business. To a much greater extent, logistics business, because we also represent various shipping lines. The shipping lines have much reduced their itineraries. They are coming, the vessels are coming mostly empty, and that is very much accelerated or augmented, not coming empty, to have an expensive new building vessel with many thousands units. As you know, all the carriers are going bigger and bigger and bigger, and we have ended up with current capacities of 18 to 22,000 TEUs being the norm of the mega lines. And of course, you cannot fill up all these containers because there is no trade. So China has particularly been affected because there is no imports. You probably know that approximately 42% of the world trade comes from or goes to China in total volumes, and very much more of that in container business. So as liner agents, we have suffered quite a lot. And we have suffered also severely on the cruise industry, which has totally had a sudden death, if I can use the expression, because there is nobody going on board. And today's news in Trade Winds, if anybody read, says that Carnival Cruises is selling their vessels that they didn't have intention to sell, but they cannot pay the debts. And they had so far losses of $4.2 billion. This time last year, they had profits of 4.8. Now they have a loss of 4.2. How long can you sustain an industry which is closed? We heard that Hertz, you know, Hertz is the biggest company in car rentals. They are chapter 11 in the Americas. About 40,000 people without work. And that, talking about the human element, all this disruption brings, like the butterfly effect or the chaos theory. Something happens and that is causing a chain reaction. And from one side of the world, the other side of the world is affected. And I have shown this video in a presentation of mine when I spoke in a grain conference in Odessa a couple of years ago. So I will try to share my screen. We did not plan for this, but let's see if it's work. If it works, host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay, so that I cannot share that. I have a very small video of a few seconds only. If you could
Maria needs to enable your sharing screen option.
Yeah, I just want to show.
It's done now.
Okay,
You can do it.
Nikos, try.
And I will show
Yes.
my funny video, which is actually, this is a funny video, but what is happening to the world is not funny at all.
Yeah.
Share. Yes. And play.
Yeah, now we're seeing your screen.
Did you see all the screen or part of the screen?
What's this?
Hold the screen. We are seeing.
Yeah, the complete video.
So that was my
Butterfly effect.
the butterfly effect. And the ports, many of the ports, like I mentioned India, the people just left their job as they were loading or discharging vessels because they heard of the epidemic coming, and due to the media overstating what happened mostly in America, where unfortunately hundreds of thousands of people died, and it was a lot of media coverage. Everybody left their jobs. They closed the port. They announced force majeure, and this happened in Portugal and in many other areas. So there was also a very serious disruption. But I don't want to stick to what has happened, because everybody knows that. Let's talk a little bit about the future. And this butterfly house theory says that without exact knowledge of the initial conditions, there is no good prediction. Any prediction will be useless. So we are all trying to live and think, how can we cope with the future? The future, here comes the cyber side of things. We want to enter the new norm, which contains a lot of electronics. So digitalization has greatly assisted people to get together, like this media we are using today. But we also have other machines like the drones, which are again accelerated to assist in non-contact situations. Like now we have the vessels being sent a drone to do a digital survey, and the survey companies, classification societies are able to see the pictures and evaluate, and on the basis of the good standing of the principal and the vessel condition, give the certificate extensions until a manual survey can be made. We have been making supply deliveries with the drones to ships in Singapore, for example, in Rotterdam, where the authorities have allowed, because it's a little bit of a sudden thing for a government to accept a flying object to deliver things offshore because of customs reasons and whatever other reasons. The guys who run the customs and the immigration people are not so high-tech minded. So they usually put a brake into such technologies, but we have managed in a couple of places to deliver spares, not serious stuff, not very heavy, but up to 5-10 kilos, I think is possible over a few miles. We also have a tendency, this crisis has accelerated the green side of things. So everything which has to do with the environment is accelerated in theory. In practice, it has stopped because we don't do many things since we cannot move around. But there is much more accelerated discussion and new regulations. IMO, for example, have just signed a decree that they will try to measure the way ships are cleaned. And we in GSE, we have a computer robots technology which cleans the vessel by removing simultaneously the debris from the fouling. So water is pushing the fouling away, and another suction pipe brings it up to the surface, which is safely disposed in land. So keeping the environment clean is also a future thing. And another thing I would like to say is about the quality. I think from any survey we see in webinars happening around us these days, the word quality comes popping up. So people will put a greater value to quality in both physical products and services. And I believe that those who invest or have invested in quality, both physical and systems, will prevail in the future. And to conclude, I think by expecting the unexpected puts us in the best fit position to survive, as per Darwin's theory. It's not the strongest who will survive, but the most able to adapt.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Nikos. And I think for the cruise part, later on, Jean-Francois also can comment this point when we're going to ask him the question. And before I continue, I want to turn again to Mr. Aret. You have some further questions, if that's okay with you, Mr. Aret. Mr. Özcan, Serhan Özcan, merhaba Serhan, is asking you that we see that Türk PNI has gained huge success in short time. Have you been achieving your goals, he's asking?
It depends on the goals. Straightforward answer to that, yes, but goals or success is a journey, not a destination. So it continues. And every success is a port of call during this journey. Türk PNI's main objective or main mission during the establishment period was to serve the Turkish vessels trading or sailing within the cabotage waters, like passenger ships, small specialty tugs and barges, coasters, tanker barges, etc. Yeah. During the first 4 years, Türk PNI covered about 95% of this market. So that's done. But the reason that I'm saying success or mission is a journey, if Türk PNI had stayed over there, it wasn't going to be enough for that. So we opened the doors to the international market. Now, 40% of the premium income comes from the foreign flag vessels. When I say foreign flag vessels, this is not Turkish controlled foreign flag vessels. It's the premier quality Italian, French, German, Scandinavian, Middle Eastern, North African fleets. We have major fleets. Now, Türk PNI is current and providing $1 billion liability limit, and it's the first and the only Turkish insurance company who competes within the international market and who can provide $1 billion liability limit. It's the only and the first insurance company who can do that. Now we're, and it's still, we are in the 7th year. It's not maybe correct that I should disclose this, but it's official now that we are also rated by Finch. And we are in the 7th year of our operation. Now, 7 years for an insurance company is not enough, or is nothing, because we're competing with 100 years of operation. But if the mission is accomplished, I can say partly yes, but we still have further missions to be accomplished. Sorry, it became a little bit of a commercial, but that was the question. What can I do? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can continue if there are no more questions for the time being. Ms. Katerina, could you please let us know the current state of the finance market, and especially is liquidity available from banks and alternative sources to fund vessel purchases? And also from your point of view and from your own experience, is it now the best time to purchase or sell a vessel?
Thank you. Okay, first of all, the finance markets are still licking their wounds from the Lehman crisis of 2008, which was a clear banking crisis. I will touch upon all 3 points and then bring them together. When is the right time to buy or sell a vessel? Well, in shipping, that's the cardinal rule. You need to buy low and sell high. Now, when you buy low, can you find money? Probably not, because numbers don't make sense. So there is a discrepancy here. From my opinion, yes, if you have money and you believe that now is a low point, yes, you need to buy, and it may be a low point right now, but people will need to, people looking into investing at this low point will also need to count their chickens and their pocket and their bank account and do their math to make sure that there is money available to support the low market. If they buy it cash, then it's probably more sustainable, but then you have a lot of equity invested in there that you're looking for a higher market to refinance and take some equity out in order to increase your return on your investment. Cash is king, and that is something that needs to be remembered. Now, is it time to sell a vessel? Obviously not if you're in a low market, but there is a lot of forced sales right now. If like, I think one of my co-panelists said, a lot of cruise vessels are about to be sold, and I have been informed that a lot of cruise vessels are now on their way to being scrapped, not even sold in the second market. So it depends on what position each investor or company finds itself in. Now, the current state of the finance market, as I said, it's already trying to get off the ground. Banks have been hit badly from Lehman, and the losses from that point, they are still trying to recover. What are they trying to recover? The rules and regulations for finance have become more strict on the banking institutions, and therefore alternative financiers like funds have stepped in. This has made finance for shipping being very selective on the part of the banks that are there to finance. And that plays a role in at what point in the cycle do they come in and finance. So in order for the banks to make sense and tick their boxes under the regulations to give money, the market has to be on a high side. But the correct time to buy a vessel is on the low side. So as I said in the beginning, there is a challenge there, okay, and a conflict of interest between when do I invest and where do I find the money to invest. So in low periods, equity is the king. So you need to have equity to make quick movements and wait for the upside in order to take back and resume, refinance your vessels at higher levels. Now, bank finance has also become challenging because of various regulations, including environmental regulations that have come into force, and other regulations like IMO 2030, a reduction of emissions, and the ESG regulation, environmental, social, and governance regulations that is now coming into force and being adopted by a lot of banks in order to put that into the considerations of extending a loan. So a company has to now be transparent, adopt diversity, make sure it has corporate governance and proof of that. And a lot of banking, and of course, prove that it is environmentally friendly. So financing is becoming challenging, not only from the restrained liquidity on the banking market, but also on the regulations being enforced, forcing the industry to change its habits. That's not necessarily bad, but it is difficult for smaller companies to grow. Now, are there alternative financiers to the to banks? Yes, there are. Why are they attractive or aren't they attractive? It's all a matter of cost and pricing. The bank sector was the largest and still is the largest provider of money in the industry. Around 2008, before Lehman hit and the banking market actually closed down for quite a few years, there was outstanding approximately close to $1 trillion in finance in the market. 40 top banks at that time had extended to the shipping market approximately 470 billion out of that 950 billion. That number today, as far as banks are concerned, is down to 350 based on last year's report. There is no other newer figures available. However, there are new players in the market. So our traditional banks that always were there and were extending a lot of money at cheap pricing, have gone out of the market. So we have new players, we have new schemes, we have leasing schemes, we have financing schemes from banks, and we have the alternative financiers, which are the funds. The funds is a different type of animal who has now come into and is targeting the shipping finance market because of its gap in availability of liquidity for the assets. However, funds are very expensive. And why are they expensive? Because their policy is something different than a bank. Funds are money that investors put their money in to get a return, and they are guaranteed returns north of 12 or 15%. So if I am an investor in a fund, and instead of taking my money and putting it into a deposit in a bank that will give me close to zero today interest rate, a fund on the other side is promising me higher returns. What does that fund do? It invests that money in various pockets of investments, one of which is shipping. It doesn't invest the total fund money, but a percentage. Still, on every pocket of investment, it has to make a high return, including shipping. Funds came into shipping as alternatives, as equity partners after Lehman. And because they again saw a gap in the market and an opportunity, they thought that the shipping had now dropped and it was the time to go in on the low point. Well, at that point, they hadn't realized how difficult shipping is and what other considerations are there that the fund did not know of the risks. The funds have another problem, restriction, not a problem. They have a short-term facility tenor, meaning that I am an investor in a fund and I am guaranteed that I'm going to take my money out of that fund in 5 to 7 years, which means if a fund comes in as an equity partner in shipping, it has to get the money out and sell the assets in 5 to 7 years. That, for everybody in shipping, understands that it is a very short tenor. So as equity partners, funds actually burned their fingers after 2008. They invested and they had a very difficult time in disinvesting in that short period of time because the assets never, or the market never actually went up. So then funds realized that, okay, what is missing in the market? It's liquidity as finance. So now they're coming in and giving money, not as equity partners, but as banks in financing terms, as loans, but not at banking terms as far as pricing is concerned, but with higher requests. In a low market, you can't even make your break even, which is your operating expenses. It is very difficult to meet a debt service payment in where we are actually today with a very low interest rate. Imagine if you have an interest rate of LIBOR plus 6, 7, 8%. Okay, LIBOR is low, but that still gives you a interest rate of around 7% compared to a bank of an interest rate of around 3.5% all in. So, or to 4. And that is even challenging. So money is out there, but it is a chicken and egg contradictory situation of applying it to finance. Somebody struggles, it's challenging to find new finance for new purchases. Now that may be the time to go in. Now, finance is a very interesting animal in my point of view, because it all has to do on how do you structure things. And I believe shipping finance from the banking point of view can be very sustainable and viable if you structure it correctly. However, policies of the banks and the regulations now being enforced are not making the life of the officers trying to structure the loan competitively to allow for the low market and then with higher returns or whatever for the higher market, because of the restrictions they are being enforced and the costs they are having to find liquidity to finance the market. So it is very challenging. Money is out there. When we have a low market, but it is difficult to tap at the cycle that investors would like to find the money, the low side. In today's low side and low market with COVID, we are again experiencing going to the markets and trying to reschedule. You can do new financings if the project makes sense and you can allow for extra equity being put into the project. So if you can finance low, then it is a viable finance, which again, you're putting in more equity. So it is a commercial decision on how do I go and buy a vessel now in the low market. Again, I'd like to repeat, cash is king. The finance markets are cyclical and they follow actually the cycle of the shipping. So there isn't a lot of money available when the shipping cycle is low. And there's a lot of money available when the shipping cycle is high. And that is the repeating mistake that the finance markets make, where they should be counter-cyclical in how they finance. They should be giving money in the low cycle because it is safer. It will go up. Whereas if they finance in the high cycle, there's only one way to go, down. So that's where trouble begins. And if they finance somewhere in the middle, that's where you could say it begins to be a little bit sustainable with some future in getting some repayment before it goes up and then back down again. I don't know what else to tell you. If you have something else to ask me, it's a big topic about having liquidity in the market. It is challenging times. Banks are assisting clients right now. There are banks in Greece. The Greek banks are allowed, not only the Greek banks, but there is a European guideline to assist the shipping companies with some restructurings and some waivers until the end of the year to assist them in being a little bit more sustainable in this challenging time of charter markets, because it's out of everybody's control. The market just hit rock bottom, okay? Everybody, worldwide. As I said in the beginning, this is a world crisis, and shipping really reflects that. We move 90% of the cargo, and we are doing it in very expensive assets because the world fleet is very young right now. We are close, I may say, that we may be seeing things like the crisis of the 80s, where a lot of scrapping took place of new buildings. From a new building yard, vessels would go directly to the scrap yard. Supply and demand has to equalize in order to make profits in shipping. But right now, the supply and the demand side are out of sync for their own reasons in various capacities. When we had a very low market in bulkers because of COVID, but the tankers were doing very well for other reasons, non-COVID. So it's a fragmented market in the industries, and each segment has its own considerations in the finance market and in the appetite of investors, be it banks or be it funds. The final thing I'd like to say is that with the new regulations, ESG, the environmental, social, and governance, that a lot of banks are now adopting, along with Poseidon principles. Poseidon principles is a part of all of that. They need to tick a lot of boxes, and the companies need to be more corporate in order to attract the money that is out there. That is doable. So larger companies, more corporate style companies have access to liquidity easier than medium-sized or smaller companies. Those are the ones that are struggling in such a market.
Okay, thank you so much, Katerina. Very interesting. Actually, we have a question for you from Zainab Akaya, but if you don't mind, we're gonna take a last question for Mr. Aret, and then we revert to you with.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Aret, we have one last question for you from Mr. Karim Marmouni. He asks, did PNI receive requests from the members to reduce the premium, and what the conditions will be taken in consideration in the future to face such situation, i.e. pandemic? Thank you.
Insurance is becoming popular all of a sudden. Yes, we have received such requests, certainly, and not only we, most of the underwriters received such requests, but an insurance policy is a contract that the period is specified within the period heading. And hull and machinery insurances, PNI insurances, are usually annual contracts. They have a specific attachment date and a specific expiration date. During this period, if you do not, by mutual consent, if you do not change the conditions, the premium does not change. Now, how do you change the conditions? You can lay up a ship. There are two types of layups: cold layup without the crew on board, and hot layup with limited crew on board. If you are in a cold layup within a period of uninterrupted 30 days, then most PNI clubs, including us, return about 90% of the premium attributed to the layup period. But a vessel has to be layup uninterrupted minimum 40 days. Other than that, we have given quite generous extension periods in premium payments because of the pandemic. We have given, and actually most other group clubs did this also, they have extended or added to the number of installments, and they delayed the payments, installments, etc. But straight away, without changing the conditions, a premium reduction is not technically possible. I hope I could reply to the question.
Well, thank you very much. If the person wants to add something, if this person has other questions, we can give him your contact details. We have many questions for all participants, all the panelists, from all the participants, and it's great to see the huge interest. We will have a Q&A round at the end. So now I will have...
Excuse me, can I interrupt you for a second? Because I may not have the opportunity later on. Thank you all, and thank you for all the participants for following us. It was an honor for me to take part in such a group. And apologize again for untimely departure, because I may disappear in the next maybe 15-20 minutes. I'm sorry about that. Thank you all. And thank you for the participants who are following us on their computers.
And thank you to you for being with us here today. It's really an honor that you're with us and sharing your experience and knowledge. Thank you.
Aret Ustadım, I would like to thank you as well before you go. Thank you so much for your participation and your valuable inputs. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you all again. Thank you.
And as Ansam mentioned,
oh, thank you, Faristo.
And as Ansam mentioned, we'll be taking the questions at the end of the session to the other participants, as Mr. Aret had to leave before we addressed him right now. And for the other participants, for the other speakers, we'll be addressing during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll continue with Mr. Jeffrey Blum. Mr. Jeffrey, how is the current shipping and trading crisis different from previous ones? You started to talk about this at the beginning of the webinar, but will this difference create disputes in which COVID-19 has been described as force majeure event? And will this affect the drafting of contracts in the future? And also, very interesting question, will more disputes be resolved remotely, or we will all return to physical arbitration and court hearings as soon as it is safe to do so?
Thank you for those three somewhat varied, but also in a way linked questions. And I will try to limit my comments to 10 minutes, although I could easily talk about this for several hours. Your first question, how is the current shipping and trading crisis different from previous ones? I would say in the main it's different because this has hit all of us personally as opposed to purely from a business perspective. This is not, however, a new situation for shipbrokers. We saw this exactly as Katerina has explained to us just now in the 1980s when we had to adapt because the then normal was replaced or had to be replaced from a business perspective, but we still carried on with our own office lives and our personal lives exactly as before. Relationships, of course, became even more important in order to stop companies from disappearing or having too many disputes. In the 1990s, specifically 1992, and most specifically in London, the shipbroking community in April of 1992 had to adapt very suddenly, literally over a weekend, because the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, had exploded a massive bomb in the city right outside the Baltic Exchange. It was 1,000 pounds, roughly 440 kilos, of which 10% was Semtex, courtesy of Gaddafi, and the rest was ammonium nitrate. It made a very big hole in quite a few buildings, destroyed quite a lot of buildings, very badly damaged quite a lot of buildings. And it also affected me because I was the broker who was nearest to the bomb when it went bang right outside the Baltic. I was literally just leaving my office then. It exploded 2 meters behind me, and I was catapulted above what used to be the General Council of British Shipping Headquarters and came down after about floating down from 8 stories up onto the rubble of that building. And a lot of other buildings were very badly damaged. I was very badly damaged, but I was, fortunately, I was rebuilt. It meant that a lot of the broking houses, particularly the small ones, had to adapt very quickly and move to somewhere outside the city, to somewhere nearer to their homes, or in many cases to their homes, or a combination of homes for the small 2, 3, 4, 5 broker houses, which are in the suburbs outside London and also in the countryside and smaller cities and towns outside London. This had to be done extremely urgently. The Baltic Exchange, in fact, moved to new premises at Lloyd's literally over that weekend, and business was up and running again on the Tuesday. Monday, unfortunately, was lost to trade. I was lost to trade for quite a few months for obvious hospital reasons, but that's a different story. It meant, therefore, that broking houses had to adapt extremely quickly to new norms, to new ways of trading and broking with each other. No longer to go every day to the trading floor of the exchange, but to use the telephone much more, and in those days also telexes, and something new then called fax. Obviously things like emails and smartphones didn't exist then. And so we didn't have the current artificial intelligence that we have today, but certainly technical help today is different from the way it was 28 years ago. But we relied, therefore, on our relationships, on trust, and I would stress again on professionalism of our industry. And it became very noticeable very quickly that those who were qualified, who had the certificates to prove that they had taken, for example, the examinations of the Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers, were better able to cope with the challenges that very suddenly were thrust upon us all, better than those who were new to the game, new to our industry, and treated it, frankly, as a game rather than as the professional problems which could be and then were very swiftly overcome. So we're not new to this. What is different now, of course, is that it's affecting all of us personally and from a health perspective as well. And I just wanted to come back to what I think it was Nikos was saying earlier about crew. And certainly, and we've had a comment also from my friend Catherine Bacon about this, and no doubt she will be able to pitch in later on as well during the Q&A session. But crew physical illness is as nothing, although that's very serious, to the crew's mental illness. Mental well-being has to be very much better considered. Again, we have, I believe, still not fully recovered from that. We're now coming into a second or even third wave of downturn, but we're trying to be as resilient and adaptable as possible. We've had to adapt both as owners and charterers and brokers and advisors. So using modern techniques, which were not available to us 20, 28, 30, 35 years ago, should help us much more than we had in those earlier years. How that's going to pan out over the next, say, 5 or 10 years will depend partly on education, partly on the expanse of, I keep using the same word, professionalism, rather than being amateurs. And I'm going to introduce a dear friend of mine who is no doubt going to come in later on, Henry Mitten Mills, who has an extremely useful idea, useful to us all, I think, idea of what I call his helicopter view of where he thinks we will all be in the next 5 to 10 years. And I will introduce Henry later on to join us. Because he's not a panelist, I will introduce him via my mobile phone, and he will be able to see you and you can see him. But that's for slightly later. And thank you, Henry, for discussing it with me earlier. Your second question to me was, will this difference create disputes in which COVID-19 has been described as a force majeure situation? And would this affect the drafting of contracts in future? Of course, that's going to keep lawyers very busy for quite a long time. I would suggest to you that force majeure might be used as an excuse, if that's the right word, if a contract had been drafted and if people were genuinely unaware of the current situation, as we all were, before February, very early March. Of course, provably unaware, in which case force majeure might be usable, and it's in great discussion right now, not only with insurers and lawyers, but also amongst the arbitration and other legal and court fraternity, which I also frequent, of course. It is after March 2020 that I would suggest force majeure is very unlikely to be honored, because the global pandemic was then no longer a surprise. And I think for anybody to try to use force majeure now, certainly in the last 2 or 3 months and going forward, I think would probably be squashed pretty quickly, certainly by insurance, by underwriters, and of course therefore P&I clubs, and those involved with trying to resolve disputes. Force majeure, after all, is not specifically covered by English law, if we're being really precise about it. And English law governs, as I'm sure we all know, some between 90 and 95% of all shipping and trading contracts anyway. So to be really precise, force majeure is not in play anyway. But there are quite a few people who have put the words and therefore the concept of force majeure into their charter parties, which must therefore be honoured if appropriate. And that's the point. I don't think that after March of this year we could say that force majeure is an excuse or is appropriate. I want to talk a little bit more about the third question that you posed, and I'm aware of time. You asked me, will more disputes be resolved remotely, or will we all return to physical arbitration and court hearings as soon as it is safe to do so? Of course, the big question is, when will it be safe to do so? And obviously nobody knows yet. I would suggest this covers quite a lot. This is a very, very wide open question. And I have made a few notes here, which I would like to share with you. Mention was made earlier of bills of lading and electronic signatures, digital signatures, electronic bills of lading. They are perforce having to become more acceptable to owners and operators. Lawyers and certainly P&I clubs are already giving guidance to their members, as are lecturers to their delegates, as I do every week. And it is becoming more understandable, although not yet acceptable, to many owners and operators, as in time charterers, disponent owners. I think it was Aret who mentioned causation, and specifically proximate versus remote causation. And I certainly endorse exactly everything that he has said on that. And likewise, I would suggest that that is the subject of our, perhaps may I suggest, second webinar in not too distant a future. I think to look at what is the cause of a dispute and the links in the chain not being broken, but is it nevertheless too remote? Or is it, or could it be seen that the cause of something was actually proximate enough to be covered by an insurance policy or in a commercial contract, is a huge topic. Likewise, equally huge, I think we are going to see the beginnings of quite a lot of disputes in which I will certainly be involved as an arbitrator, I'm sure of it, regarding various laytime and demurrage clauses in voyage charter parties. What exactly nowadays do we mean by safe when we're talking about a safe port or even a safe berth? Will laytime and demurrage disputes increase? I am sure they will. Will demurrage be argued against damages for detention? I'm sure that that will happen too. One of the big questions in laytime and demurrage, laytime specifically, is of course when the ship is an arrived ship, and notice of readiness is one of the main documents that we use in that. I think that notice of readiness disputes will increase enormously in the next 6 to 12 months, and perhaps most especially regarding the pandemic, the concept of free critique and the current clauses that we find in voyage charter parties concerning WIFPON, whereby the master may tender notice of readiness whether the vessel is in free pratique or not, will become a much bigger issue than ever before. Previously, until I would say January of this year, or certainly until November, early December last year, free pratique was almost automatic. You rocked up at a port, hello, I'm here, I've arrived. Any diseases on board? No, thank you, Captain, please come in. It was almost as basic as that and almost automatic. That said, are port health surveyors willing to go on board a ship nowadays? They fear for their own safety, personal safety. Likewise with pilots. I know that we heard from a pilot just now, the Rockstar, and this must be really quite a worry to the pilot community. I know a number of pilots who are very worried about it. They still go on board ships. They do guide them into ports. It is an exceptionally responsible job, particularly nowadays, and they're wearing masks and gloves and so forth. But nevertheless, some health authorities of some ports are simply saying we're not going on board. And if that affects the free pratique of a vessel and therefore the readiness, the perceived readiness of the vessel to come in, is she an arrived ship? And therefore will lay time count? And if it doesn't, then who pays for that time? Will that be the owners? Is it the owner's fault that there is this pandemic? Clauses may have to be adapted to sharing such a situation 50-50 with the charterers, assuming the charterers are responsible for a so-called safe port. It's going to cause a lot of disputes, I'm sure of it. Part of your question was also regarding